What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and I have another draft strategy video for you all. So a couple days ago, I went through the best early round draft strategy, so picks 1 through 4. Today, we're going to be focusing on the middle of the first round, so the best strategy if you're picking from picks 5 through 8. I'm going to be going through some of the best targets that you guys should be looking for in the early rounds, when you're picking from 5 through 8, just some overall kind of general draft strategy tips for this range, and then also just breaking down 4 different mock drafts. So I've got a mock from pick 5, 6, 7, and 8, just kind of talking through my strategy and showing you how some of these drafts can go. If you guys enjoy the video, you think it's helpful, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and also you can go check out the other draft strategy video. I'm going to have a late first round pick coming out in a couple of days also. But thank you all so much for stopping by, and let's just jump right into it. So we're going to start off with some of the best round 1 targets, and as you can see here on the graphic, these are a list of potential players who might be available when you're picking, 5, 6, 7, or 8. And you can see I have the players, I have their positional rankings. This is where they're ranked per ADP, and then you can see their ADP. And that ADP is a combination of Sleeper, ESPN, and Yahoo. Kind of wanted to get a well-rounded set of consensus ADP for this. So that's that number next to their positional rank. And then these players are also color-coded based on how willing I would be to draft them in this range. So green means I think these guys are great picks. I think they're solid values. Yellow is, I think they're an okay pick. Maybe I don't love it, but I'm fine with it. And then red is I would be avoiding guys in this range. So let's just start off by talking about some of the wide receivers I'd be interested in here. For me, if Jamar Chase is falling to pick 5 or later, I'm all in. I think he's a smash pick. And then there's 2 other wide receivers I really like here. Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill. I'd be willing to take those players as early as pick 4. For me, I have a big 3 of Jefferson, Chase, and Christian McCaffrey. I think you can make a strong argument that Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill are right after those guys. And then I also do just want to give a shout out to Stephon Diggs, because I think he is someone you should be considering with your number 8 pick. If some of these other players are already off the board, he didn't quite get here in terms of the ADP, but I do think he could be considered as a top 8 fantasy pick. Travis Kelce, I have him as yellow here. I'm okay if you pick him pretty much anywhere from 6, 7, 8. For me, he's my 9th overall player, so I don't really love the idea of picking him top 8, but I understand, the upside of the positional advantage. For me, just a little bit concerned about the age. Not saying he's going to fall off the cliff, but I do think the risk is there, and I just don't know if the same risk is there for, some of these other players going in the same range. And then the 2 reds I have here are Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. For me, there is a significant tier break between the Eckler-Bijan tier, however you have those guys ordered, and then how I view Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. I'd be fine to take JT or Saquon at the 1-2 turn. I'm just not willing to spend a mid first round pick on those guys. So those are the players I'm looking at in the mid first round. If you can get one of Chase, Eckler, Kupp, Bijan, or Tyreek Hill, I feel like at this spot, it's honestly a win. Now let's shift into round 2, take a look at some of the players who might be available here. And I do think this is a really solid spot to be picking in the second round. I feel like you're going to have your choice of some really solid wide receivers or some really solid running backs. So let's just knock out the wide receivers first. These are all guys I have in green. So CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson. CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra are both guys I value as first round picks. At worst, 1-2 turn guys. So if you're able to draft these players in mid-round 2, I think it's an absolute steal. For Garrett Wilson, not quite as high on Wilson as consensus, but I still think he's a really strong pick here in the mid-second round. Great rookie season, getting a significant quarterback upgrade with Aaron Rodgers. Now looking at some of these running backs, we've got Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, and Tony Pollard. Actually, I'm sorry, I skipped over A.J. Brown there. Another guy I'm not quite as high on, but I still think he's a solid pick. I would go Amon-Ra over A.J. Brown, but we're kind of nitpicking at this point. Now looking at the running backs, Jacobs, Chubb, and Tony Pollard. For me, I have Jacobs here in yellow, and that's just because there's a few running backs going after him in terms of ADP that I would prefer. I'd prefer Nick Chubb. I'd also prefer Tony Pollard. I'd even prefer a guy like Breece Hall, who who I believe is going at like the 2-3 turn in terms of this ADP. So if you do like Jacobs ahead of those guys, like I'm fine with you spending a mid-second round pick. But for me, that's why he's a yellow. Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard. If these guys are going to be your, RB2 after a Bijan or Eckler start, I think you're set up great for a double hero RB build. If these guys are going to be your RB1 after a Tyreek Hill, a Cooper Kupp pick, I think they're very serviceable RB1s also. So like those guys. And then the one red here is going to be Josh Allen. He's going off as the QB2, more like back end second round, but if Mahomes goes here, people are going to consider Josh Allen. The way that I look at this and the way that I've been looking at these mocks is that there's probably going to be someone who's going to reach for a second round quarterback, one of Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, or Patrick Mahomes. It's just not something I'm going to be willing to do. With these mocks, what I've seen is one of these quarterbacks goes round 2, one of them goes like early round 3, and then a lot of the times you'll see one of these guys kind of fall to like mid to late third round. I just don't want to be the guy who's reaching mid-second round to get a Josh Allen when you might be able to get a Jalen Hurts late in the third, or a Lamar Jackson at the 3-4 turn, or even somewhere in the fourth round, a Fields at the 4-5 turn. Those are just values I much prefer over getting one of these round 2 quarterbacks, especially when you have studs on the board like CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard. Just a spot where I'd be looking to go, with another position. Now, shifting into some of my round 3 targets, let's start off by talking about the running backs here. So there's just going to be 2, honestly, in this range, Ramondre Stevenson and Najee Harris. So Ramondre, I think he's a great pick at this spot. I have kind of like a big tier 3, I believe, of running backs, or it might be like a tier 4. You've got CMC, Eckler, Bijan, those guys up there. JT, Saquon, you could argue like Chubb, Pollard, but then there's like that big tier of Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Ramondre, all of those guys. I'd be fine to really take any of those dudes late second round. So if I'm getting Ramondre mid third, I think that's a steal. Obviously, this would be like barring the signing of Dalvin Cook, but honestly, he still might stay there even if that happens. The guy, the running back right below him, Najee, not a huge fan of at this ADP. I do think there's a drop-off from Ramondre to Najee Harris. I'd consider Najee at like the 2-3 turn, or sorry, the 3-4 turn, but I still don't even think I would love it there. And then I do just want to give an honorable mention to Jahmyr Gibbs, because he didn't end up here in terms of his ADP, but he's someone I would be considering at this spot, if some of these other guys are already picked. We've got Mark Andrews at tight end. I think he's a great option in the mid-third round. You're getting a high-end, elite tight end 1. Definitely someone you should be interested in. Some wide receivers, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith. These are guys that are going as like late second, 2-3 turn guys on other platforms. So I think if you're getting them mid-third, it's a steal. Chris Olave, another guy. I actually have Olave ranked ahead of Higgins and Devonta Smith, and he's going like 3-4 turn. I'd be totally interested in him mid-third round. The only wide receiver I don't love in this range is DK Metcalf. He's just someone I'm going to be lower on than consensus. I'd prefer other guys like Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, even a Keenan Allen over Metcalf. And then Burrow here, just can't pull the trigger on QB4 Burrow. I have both Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields ranked ahead of him, so that's why I'm not really interested in Burrow here in the mid-third round. But now let's get into the mock drafts. So we're going to start it off by going with pick 5. This was 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and then a flex in terms of the lineup. And this was a spot where I actually started off with an elite wide receiver 1. So I had the option of going with an Austin Eckler or a Bijan Robinson. For this specific one, PPR scoring, I went with Tyreek Hill. Like I said, I think if you're getting really any of Hill, Kupp, Eckler, or Bijan in this range, I view it as a big win here. So Tyreek Hill at the 105. Then in the second round, this is a spot where I didn't know if I would like a running back in the third round, so I wanted to get my first running back here. I went with Tony Pollard. This is something I talked about in my first draft strategy video. What I have seen is that if you do not leave the first 3 rounds with at least one running back that you like, I feel like you're just not setting yourself up great moving forward. And it's not necessarily because like I think the wide receivers are bad. Like I think in a vacuum, maybe some people would prefer these wide receivers over the running backs. But I think once you start to get into these middle rounds, right, we're looking at some of these wide receivers versus the running backs coming off the board. Like, do I want to pick round 5 Judy or like a round 5 Miles Sanders or James Conner? Like, I'm taking the wide receiver in that range. Whereas early on, I think these running backs are still really strong. So I went Tony Pollard round 2, start off 1 wide receiver, 1 running back. Then we get around to round 3. And for me, this was a pretty clear pick here. A lot of the top running backs were already off the board. A lot of the top wide receivers were off the board. So this pick actually came down to Mark Andrews and Jahmyr Gibbs. I do prefer Andrews. Consider Jahmyr Gibbs, just worried about maybe not getting a good second running back until later on in the draft. But somehow Jahmyr Gibbs falls to the mid-4th round, so he ends up being an absolute steal there. Jahmyr Gibbs, like I said, I would have considered him in the mid-3rd. I get him in the mid-4th. So far, we're 1 wide receiver, 2 running backs, and a tight end. This is a spot where, looking at ADP, I really like the value on the wide receivers. So I just fire off 4 straight wide receiver picks. We go Jerry Jeudy, Mike Williams, Deontay Johnson, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. I feel confident about my 2 running backs. We now have 3 wide receivers in our starting lineup with Tyreek Hill, Jeudy, and then Williams in the flex. And then we have Deontay and JSN as, potential flex options for injuries, bye weeks, all of that stuff. Now, since we had kind of neglected the quarterback position at this point, we didn't get one of those elite options. This is where I snagged Anthony Richardson. I know a lot of people aren't going to be this high on Anthony Richardson. For me, I really like the upside. I think his legs are going to be a huge asset for fantasy football. And it's kind of a spot where if I think there's going to be solid streaming options available, obviously Anthony Richardson is not a very safe pick. But if I think there are going to be week-to-week quality options on waivers, I'm willing to take him. I'm also willing to take him if I'm going to go out and draft a second quarterback, and that's exactly what I did here. So I went Anthony Richardson in round 9, then I went with Daniel Jones in round 11. I think Daniel Jones is like a fringe QB1. I think he's someone who can be relied upon week to week, so I like kind of like the 2 quarterbacks I have here in my lineup. And then since I had gone so in on the wide receiver position, just wanted to finish it up with some running backs. So Damian Harris round 10, and then Jaylen Warren round 12. So I honestly really liked the way this draft kind of played out. I feel like, round 1, round 2, pretty, in line with ADP. I think we got some values with Andrews in round 3, Jahmyr Gibbs in round 4, and then I do really like the wide receivers we kind of picked up in rounds 5 through 8. So now let's look at a mock draft from the 106, and I kind of took a different strategy in this video. So instead of going wide receiver, I had the option, could have gone Tyreek Hill, switch it up a little bit. I went with Bijan Robinson. You could go Bijan, Eckler, whatever you want. Not going to push back super hard on either one of those dudes. I go Bijan Robinson here at the 106, and then I wanted to kind of see what it would look like with like a double hero RB build, going running backs in the first 2 rounds. So I went Bijan round 1, turn around, went with Tony Pollard again in the 2nd round. Then heading into the 3rd round, this was a spot where I went with Calvin Ridley. Now I think the mid-3rd round is interesting because I think there's going to be certain drafts where you get some value falling to you, whether it's a Mark Andrews, whether it's like a T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, maybe it's like a running back, a Breece Hall, Ramondre falling to you. I think that's a way where you can get some really nice value, but I also think you can kind of get stuck in a spot where you don't necessarily love the pick. Like in other drafts, I've been able to get Ridley at the 3-4 turn. So do I love spending a mid-3rd round pick on him? Not really. I guess I could have gone with a Jalen Hurts. For me, just wasn't interested at that point. So I went Calvin Ridley to be my wide receiver 1. Would I have preferred a Olave, Higgins, Devonta Smith? Sure, but I still think Ridley is a solid option. Then in the 4th round, we see Lamar Jackson fall to the mid-4th. I have Lamar Jackson in a tier with Hurts, Allen, and Mahomes. So if those guys are going, 2nd to 3rd round, and I can get Lamar in the mid-4th, I'm going to pull the trigger on it. So through 4 rounds, we have our 2 running backs, our wide receiver 1, and then our QB 1. I then just go through, just spam the wide receiver position: Mike Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Addison, George Pickens. I think I forgot to mention at the beginning, this was PPR. We had 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and then 2 flex spots this time. So I've got the wide receivers. Those dudes have filled out the flex, and then Pickens, 1 spot on the bench. This was a draft where we didn't go tight end early on, so I kind of needed to, get a tight end in the later rounds. I drafted Pat Frymuth in round 9. Not a guy who's probably going to have a crazy high ceiling, but, I think he's serviceable as like a back end tight end 1, maybe has like mid-tier tight end 1 upside this season. Got 1 more wide receiver in Rashad Bateman, especially when I go running backs early on. Like, I want wide receivers through my flexes compared to like the running backs we're drafting in this area. So George Pickens, Rashad Bateman, both on my bench. Those are guys that can filter in for bye weeks or injuries. And then since we hadn't drafted any running backs since the first 2 rounds, just kind of, hit the draft button on Jerick McKinnon and Tank Bigsby. McKinnon could have some week-to-week value. Bigsby, maybe some week-to-week value in a committee, but, probably more just like a handcuff guy. But someone I like is a late-round running back. So I actually do like the way this draft played out. I think our wide receivers probably could be a little bit stronger in terms of like, upside-wise. Like Ridley as my wide receiver 1, Williams as wide receiver 2. These are guys where, in the grand scheme of things, Ridley is like a higher end wide receiver 2. Mike Williams is like a back end wide receiver 2. So it could have gone a little bit better that way, but I think it was all right, starting off running back. Now let's look at our draft from pick 107. So this was a draft where I went running back again. Instead of Bijan Robinson this time, I went Austin Eckler at the 107. And then in round 2, I ended up going with a wide receiver for the first time in this video. I think I went Pollard in the previous 2 drafts. So I go Jalen Waddle. We start off 1 running back, 1 wide receiver. At this point, kind of pretty flexible going into round 3. If we have a value at wide receiver, a value at running back, a value at tight end, I'm willing to take it. I'm on the clock here, and this pretty much came down to Breece Hall or Mark Andrews. And for me, I'm very high on Breece Hall. I have him ahead of Josh Jacobs. I have him like right behind like that Chubb Pollard area. So if you're going to give me 3rd round Breece Hall, I'm going to take that all day long. I pulled the trigger on Breece Hall here in round 3. So we start off 2 running backs, 1 wide receiver. And this is kind of what I was mentioning where, last round, mid-3rd round, maybe the value wasn't great on a Calvin Ridley, but you do have kind of like the upside of one of these big names slipping into the mid-3rd round, and you can capitalize like I did here with Breece Hall. Then once again, just kind of spamming the wide receiver position if we don't go wide receiver heavy early on. So I go Debo mid-4th round. Admittedly, not a big Debo guy, but if he's going to fall, I'll take him. Christian Watson, Mike Williams. I think Mike Williams is a great value in these drafts. Treylon Burks and George Pickens. Once again, this is PPR, 2 flexes. So we've got 2 wide receivers on our bench that I feel confident in. Maybe won't feel super confident in Treylon Burks if they do end up signing DeAndre Hopkins, which is, it kind of looks like that's where it's going, but this was obviously recorded before that. And then since we hadn't gone tight end yet, this is kind of a rare spot where we didn't go early tight end or early quarterback. So I go with David Njoku here. I do like him as like one of these later round tight ends. I think he's solid. We go Damian Harris as a depth option at the running back position. I think I wanted to go Anthony Richardson there, but he got sniped right before us. So then we end up going Daniel Jones. Like I said in one of the previous drafts, I think Daniel Jones is a very serviceable quarterback here. And then we just rounded out the draft with some running backs, Roschon Johnson and Jaylen Warren. Now shifting into the final draft, this is going to be from pick 8, and this is a spot where we went back to the wide receiver position. So I took Tyreek Hill in the pick 5 draft. We're going Tyreek Hill again in the pick 8. There is just going to be a lot of variance in this range. I feel like that's something I've noticed. There's going to be drafts where Travis Kelce goes like top 3, kind of pushes all these other dudes back. And like I said, if you're just getting one of Hill, Kupp, Eckler, or Bijan, I think you're really coming out ahead from this area. So we go Tyreek Hill round 1. Then we go Jonathan Taylor round 2. If you're going to give me like mid-second round Jonathan Taylor, I'm just going to have to take it. Then looking at round 3, this was a call between Devonta Smith and Jahmyr Gibbs for me. Since I'd already gone Jahmyr Gibbs in one of these drafts, I think Devonta Smith is a great value at pick 308. So I go with Devonta Smith there. And then I followed it up with a mid fourth round Lamar Jackson, like I did in one of the previous drafts. So 2 wide receivers, 1 running back, 1 quarterback. At this point, I'm maybe a little bit concerned about that running back 2 slot. Not kind of sure, what player I'm going to be getting there. I might just have to go with like a kind of hero RB build and try to get some dudes with some upside in the later rounds. So I go Mike Williams round 5, Chris Godwin round 6. At this point, we have wide receivers through the flex, so looking good there. Then in round 7, David Montgomery is available, and to be honest, I'm not like a huge David Montgomery guy this season, but I think round 7, when I didn't have an RB2, I feel like that price was pretty fair there for Montgomery. So I go him. He's going to be my RB2. Then I go Treylon Burks in round 8. Obviously, once again, before the potential D-Hop move. Zach Charbonnet, I think a solid running back 3. Has some week-to-week committee value. Also has the handcuff value with Kenneth Walker. Then I go Bateman round 10. Rashad Bateman in round 10 I think is great. And then this was another spot where we didn't go early tight end. So we go with Tyler Higbee here. I didn't think the value was there early on like an Njoku, a Freiermuth, and Evan Ingram. So, we end up kind of stuck with one of these later round tight ends. But if I'm going to just totally punt the tight end position, Higbee's the guy I'm kind of looking for in those later rounds. Pretty much Higbee or Kincaid. Those are the guys I'm looking at. And then just wrapping it up with a Jerick McKinnon. So overall, I feel like picks 5 through 8, there's a lot of variance with what you can do, especially early on in the drafts, right? You can start off wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. You can start off running back, running back, running back. You can start off, 1-1. There's just a lot of different ways these drafts can kind of shake out, especially from this, kind of draft range. You also have opportunities for like Mark Andrews in the mid-3rd round. You have opportunities for, if you want one of those elite quarterbacks mid-3rd, or honestly mid-4th if you have a Lamar Jackson. So I think there's a lot of variance in this spot. I think you really want to be flexible from the start. I wouldn't be going into these drafts saying like, I'm going to go wide receiver, or I'm going to go running back, because you just want to take the value and then kind of figure it out as your draft progresses. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know what you guys think. If you did stay all the way until the end, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said at the top, going to have picks 9 through 12 coming out in a couple of days, so stay tuned for that. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.